Good evening and welcome to tonight's talk on preventing and reversing diabetes. My name is Dr. Ashok Jethanandani. I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner, a graduate of Gujarat Ayurveda University from Jamnagar, from where I got my training in BA/MS. And now I have a practice in North San Jose. It's called Classical Ayurveda. And in my practice, I offer consultations and help with management of diabetes and other metabolic disorders, digestive disorders, respiratory conditions, arthritis, weight management, and many other chronic conditions for which Ayurveda offers an effective and holistic solution. We wish to thank India Community Center and particularly Erin and Neha and Pragati for providing the space and facilities for this talk. And please note that the ideas and opinions that we are discussing tonight are for educational purpose only. So I want to give you an overview of what we'll discuss tonight real quick. We'll start with some myths about diabetes. And I will try to dispel those misconceptions. Then from an Ayurvedic perspective, we'll discuss a group of disorders called prameha. And one among them, which is madhumeha, which correlates most closely with diabetes mellitus. And we'll look at the causes of prameha from a reference in Charak Samhita. Then from a modern medical perspective, we will talk about diabetes mellitus. And when I say diabetes tonight, I'm particularly referring to type 2 diabetes, which is by far the most prevalent. And we'll look at the causes and progression of type 2 diabetes. And this is important because if you understand the causes, then you may also understand what best to do to take care of those underlying causes, because any treatment is most effective if it's addressing those underlying causes. And then the rest of the talk will be of a very practical nature because I want to give you a lot of tips about what you can do with this information, particularly food guidelines, and then engaging in a variety of physical exercise, and also how medicines can be used most effectively. Since my qualification is in Ayurveda, I'll talk most about Ayurvedic herbs that are very effective for management of blood glucose. And not just a narrow focus of managing blood glucose, but when we use Ayurvedic herbs, it is addressing the whole person. So we look at the complete health of the individual and manage not just a particular issue, but the entire health. Now, I'll be giving a lot of advice, and you have probably gotten a lot of other advice from other sources, and some of it might be contradictory. So I understand if it gets confusing. So I'll also tell you how you can find out for yourself what works for you and what doesn't, so that you can be the judge. So with that, let's get started with some common myths about diabetes. And I've taken this information from a book that I recommend highly. It's called The Blood Sugar Solution by Dr. Mark Hyman. So the first myth that many people have is that diabetes is genetic. And this is partly true, but by far, diabetes is a lifestyle disorder. So we are finding out, especially in the last couple of decades, that many people, especially young people, are being diagnosed with prediabetes and also full-scale diabetes, even though they had no family history of diabetes. And we are learning more and more that this is probably due to the increased consumption of processed foods, especially sugars, starchy foods, foods that are very rich in carbohydrates. On the other hand, people who had a family history of diabetes, by being careful about their health and choosing the right things in their lifestyle, they are able to prevent diabetes altogether. So diabetes is not mainly a genetic disorder. It's mainly a lifestyle disorder. So that's good news for people who want to make the right choices and prevent this condition altogether. The second misconception is that diabetes is not reversible. And unfortunately, the experience of many people with diabetes is that they were diagnosed with diabetes, they were put on some medicine, but that medicine was not enough to control their blood glucose, and gradually their condition progressed, requiring higher and higher doses of medication, and they might be at a point where the next step is to use insulin for the management of blood glucose. For many people in this process, several complications of diabetes develop, which is the thing of main concern in this condition. So, however, this doesn't have to be. If you rely only on medication to control your blood glucose, chances are that because this is a metabolic disorder, the medicine won't be enough. Even insulin is not enough to manage blood glucose. But if you make the necessary changes in your lifestyle, especially in your food, then it is possible to get a really good handle on blood glucose control and to start reversing the progression of this disease. For those who are at an initial stage, perhaps in pre-diabetes or even diabetes, it may be possible to reverse this condition completely. So I'm not saying that this is a cure, because this condition is more of an imbalance of consumption of carbohydrates, higher consumption than you're burning as fuel. So unless you correct that imbalance, this disorder is not corrected. So we'll talk at great length about how to do that in the second half of the talk. A third misconception is that pre-diabetes is not a problem. And the term pre-diabetes itself might lead someone to get complacent that it is pre-something. So it's something that hasn't happened yet. So you might get the wrong idea that you don't need to do anything yet. Rather, I advise that if you have been diagnosed with prediabetes, that you take it as a wake-up call, and that is the best time to take corrective action, to take the steps that you need to take, and so that you can prevent diabetes entirely. And I'll talk about one more common myth, is that once you're on insulin, there's no going back. But you see, the way insulin is used is that you measure the amount of carbohydrates that you're consuming in a meal, and then you match that with your dosage of insulin. So if you significantly reduce your consumption of carbohydrates, you can significantly reduce your dosage of insulin. So people who have done that, at the very least, they have been able to reduce the dosage of insulin. Okay. So you have to be really disciplined about this. And there are people who have, as a result of good management of blood glucose, they have reversed their condition sufficiently that they don't need insulin anymore. So a lot is in your hands. You can be in charge of your own health, and that's what I'll try to convey in the talk tonight. So let's talk from an Ayurvedic perspective about Madhumeha. So Madhumeha is one of the disorders that is listed among a group of disorders called Prameha in Ayurveda. So some of the oldest textbooks of Ayurveda, like Charaka Samhita, which were written more than 3,000 years ago, they describe a group of conditions called Prameha. So we know that this metabolic disorder has been with humans for several thousands of years. It's one of the earliest disorders that has been recorded. What is common about these disorders is that there's some kind of urinary symptom. So even in diabetes, at an advanced stage, there is some disturbance with urination. There's excessive urination. What I want to talk about is the causes of prameha given in Charaka Samhita, which is the definitive textbook for internal medicine and Ayurveda. So let's look at this. So one of the main causes is excessive consumption of newly harvested grains. So grains like rice, wheat, barley, and other grains. So especially when they are newly harvested, then according to Ayurveda, they are guru, means heavy. So when you eat these grains, then heavy meaning you feel heavy for a long time after eating it. That's the meaning of heavy. Probably because when these grains are newly harvested, then their starch content is quite high. So there is a tradition in India, you might be familiar with it, that after grain is harvested, it is stored for 1 year, and only then it is consumed. Because that storage time is optimal, at the end of that grain is lighter to digest. So that's what is recommended, is you don't consume too much grain to start with, and what you consume is not newly harvested. It is Purana Dhan, as they say. It has been stored for a year. Second cause that is given is excessive consumption of sugar and sugar products. So what we mean by sugar products is anything that has been cooked with added sugar. Or in the production of sugar, there are many intermediate products like jaggery and molasses. So any of these, if they are consumed in excess, they can lead to prameha. Another cause that is given is consumption of flour products. So use of flour, whether it is a white flour or whole wheat flour or flours of various grains, if they are cooked in different ways, whether it is into a chapati or a pakoda or whether it's a pastry, excessive consumption of these products also is a cause of prameha. Then there are lifestyle causes like lack of exercise and excessive time spent sitting or lying down or sleeping. So a sedentary lifestyle, in short. So these are some of the causes given in Charak Samhita. There are many others, but I selected just a few to give you an idea that these are also the causes we know of today that cause type 2 diabetes and many other chronic conditions. So remember, most of the recommendations I'm giving today are for people who have diabetes or pre-diabetes, even pre-diabetes. Even pre-diabetes often means that there is insulin resistance, that kapha dosha has increased too much. In Ayurveda, we understand all kinds of diseases in terms of 3 doshas of the body and 2 doshas of the mind. So the bodily doshas are vata, pitta, and kapha. When these are in balance, then the body functions well. And all the normal functions of the body are carried out by these 3 doshas. But if any one of these or more than one is out of balance, usually increased, then they combine with various tissues in the body and give rise to disease. So in the case of diabetes or prameha that we are talking about, it is kapha dosha that goes out of balance first. And later on, the other doshas might also increase. So by the time it gets to the stage of madhumeha, that is an advanced stage of type 2 diabetes or even type 1 diabetes, there is also involvement of vata dosha. So it kind of is beyond the scope of this talk to go into more detail about each of these doshas. But what we are doing with Ayurvedic management is to bring all the doshas in balance. So anyone who has pre-diabetes likely has an increase of kapha dosha. So everything that we do will be to balance kapha. So let's move on to diabetes mellitus, and what is our understanding from a modern medical perspective. So our body has a system of regulation of blood glucose. With the help of many different hormones in the body, particularly insulin, our body is able to maintain a certain level of blood glucose. If this level falls too low, then there's not enough glucose to provide fuel to the brain and other organs, and you start having symptoms of low blood sugar, which can be pretty risky if it goes too low. And on the other hand, if your blood sugar is consistently high, then it causes damage to various organs of the body, and I'll go into more detail about that. So our body has this intricate system of regulating blood glucose. Now when this starts failing, then our blood glucose starts rising, and when it goes above 100 fasting blood glucose, then it is said to be pre-diabetes. And if this is not corrected and it keeps going higher and higher, and it goes beyond 125, then you get a diagnosis of diabetes. So diabetes is an impairment of our system of regulation of blood glucose. Now, by itself, you may not experience any symptoms from one or two episodes of high blood glucose, or even several years of having high blood glucose. The real risk of this disorder is that over time you start developing complications because of the damage that high blood glucose does to your body. So high level of glucose in the blood, what it does is that the glucose combines with various proteins that it comes into contact with and forms glycated end products. Now these products are inflammatory, and even insulin, the high level of insulin in the body is inflammatory. For example, glucose can combine with proteins in the lining of blood vessels, either small blood vessels or large blood vessels, causing damage to the lining. Now once there's damage to the lining, then cholesterol particles will settle in that area to patch it up, to prevent further damage. So there is plaque formation, because of which the blood flow is compromised. So blood circulation is compromised in all different parts of the body because of persistently high blood glucose. So this causes several complications. To give you some examples, the kidneys are supplied by a very good system of capillaries, but when there is consistently high blood glucose, then kidney function can suffer because of that. At a later stage, you can have complete loss of kidney function requiring dialysis. The eyes are supplied, the retina of the eyes are supplied by capillaries, which get damaged because of diabetes. It can eventually lead to blindness. The large blood vessels that supply the heart, if they get blocked, then it causes heart disease. Similarly, there is high risk of stroke, high risk of peripheral arterial disease. Diabetes affects the skin, the gums, the nerves. So many people develop peripheral neuropathy, in which there is numbness of the feet. There can even be a burning sensation in the feet, which is because of peripheral neuropathy, which means that the nerves have been damaged. So what I want to convey is that it's not the immediate symptoms that you experience, but the risk of serious complications in the future, which may come 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line. Because of it, it's really important to manage your blood sugars really well. Okay, so let's move on to talk about causes. Why does this happen? So main cause of type 2 diabetes is a diet that is particularly rich in carbohydrates. Because all carbohydrates, whether they are healthy carbohydrates coming from whole grains or fruit or from processed foods, once they're digested, they're converted into simple sugars and they raise the glucose level in the blood. So what's happening is that our consumption of carbohydrates has increased a lot. For some people, it's coming from processed foods or too much consumption of sodas. But many people who may have completely switched to healthier alternatives also, like entirely given up on sodas or even sugar completely, they find that still their blood sugar is too high. And it may be because they're still consuming a lot of grains. It might even be whole grains. It might even be quinoa. But their consumption of carbohydrates might be too much. At the same time, our lifestyles have become sedentary. So if you compare our lifestyle with what it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago, there's a big difference. At that time, people didn't have motorized transport to get around. So just getting from place to place gave them daily exercise. Occupations were more labor intensive, so people were doing more people were doing farm work or other kinds of work that required more labor. Housework was more labor intensive. At home, we were not sitting on comfortable couches. We were often sitting on the floor, which requires a certain kind of exercise of the muscles that we don't have now. So for all of these reasons, our occupations are very sedentary now. For most people, they're quite sedentary. And even if you carve out 1 hour in your daily routine for exercise, it is so much less compared to what people had just in the course of their daily life. Okay? So this is the big change that has happened in the last couple of generations. So as a result of this, we are constantly consuming food which is even more rich in carbohydrates, and the carbohydrates are digested, converted into glucose and other simple sugars, and absorbed into the bloodstream. Now our body has a system of moving it out of the bloodstream into different organs of the body, like the liver, the muscles, where it can be stored temporarily, where glucose can be stored temporarily, and also used for fuel. But the issue is that the glucose is stored, and before it can be used up, there is a new batch of glucose from the next meal, and then the next meal. So what happens is that the small storage sites that we have in the liver and the muscles, for example, for storing glucose, which are really meant for short-term storage for 2 or 3 days, they are quickly filled up. As a result of that, the liver cells and the muscle cells are not able to take in the next batch of glucose. And the way they respond to that is by down-regulating the receptors for glucose, for insulin. Down-regulating the transporters. What that means is, let's say one cell of the liver had a number of transporters for letting glucose come inside the liver cell. But now because the storage for glucose is filled up, it will close those transporters. And so insulin, which was supposed to be the messenger which helps to transport glucose, even though insulin is present, your body is producing enough insulin, still that insulin is not able to transport the glucose into the cells where it could be used, because those cells are filled up with glucose already. Does that make sense? So as a result, what happens is that different organs of the body start becoming insulin resistant. What that means is that insulin is present, but the cells of the body are not responding to it. The cells of the body are not sensitive to it. They have become resistant. So that is the first stage of type 2 diabetes. Other contributors to diabetes mellitus is obesity. There is a high association of diabetes with obesity, and also to some extent there is genetic predisposition. But I want to emphasize that there is a lot in your control in terms of lifestyle choices. So we talked about insulin resistance. The next thing that happens in type 2 diabetes is if your blood sugars are consistently high, requiring high levels of insulin for the body to manage it, then you see the body starts, the pancreas, which secretes insulin, secretes more and more insulin to try to move glucose out of the bloodstream into various organs of the body. And so your production of insulin actually goes up initially. But then over time, and it may be over a period of years, because the beta cells of the pancreas which produce insulin, because they're being worked so hard, they start failing. And by the time you even get a diagnosis of diabetes, about half your beta cells might have failed. And if corrective action is not taken, then there is more and more failure of these beta cells, so that your body is not able to produce enough insulin. And this stage of type 2 diabetes is called insulin deficiency. Now in this stage, at some point, you may become dependent on external shots of insulin. So that's insulin deficiency is the next stage of type 2 diabetes. So let's move on to practical ideas about what you can do. So I want to start with a quotation by Dr. Bernstein, who has written a very famous book called Dr. Bernstein's Diabetes Solution. I highly recommend that. So one of the first things he says in the book is, you are the only person who can be responsible for normalizing your blood sugars. And I like this. I find this really inspiring for two reasons. For one thing, he emphasizes that you are the only person who can be responsible, because diabetes is mainly a lifestyle disorder. And so you are the one who can make changes in your diet, who can make changes in your physical activity, in the way you deal with stress, all of which have a bearing on blood sugar. Secondly, he talks about normalizing blood sugars. So he emphasizes that it is possible to have normal blood sugars, meaning the blood sugars that any non-diabetic person may have, by correctly addressing the underlying causes. So how can you do that? There is a threefold approach, which I also follow. Number one is making dietary changes. So we'll talk in detail about that. What kind of changes? How much carbohydrate, for example? Secondly, to engage in regular physical activity, because that also helps a lot. Thirdly, if you need to use medicine, and some people will need to use medicine, and their doctors may have prescribed various medicines for managing diabetes. Since my qualification is in Ayurveda, I'll talk about how Ayurvedic herbs can be used, perhaps in a complementary manner with the medicines you may already be taking. Okay. So let's look at these one by one. But before we go into that, I want to caution you, before making any changes in your diet or embarking on any new exercise regimen, do consult your doctor. Especially if you're taking oral anti-diabetic medicines, or if you're taking insulin, then you have to be careful that when you're making these changes, your blood sugars don't drop too low. And let's get into the question about food guidelines. So if you think of the three macronutrients that we consume, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, I'll give you recommendations for all three. Starting with carbohydrates, which I already said is the main cause. High consumption of carbohydrates is the main cause of consistently high blood sugars. So it's best if your diet is low in carbohydrates, as low as you can make it. Okay. There is carbohydrate in every food. So the idea is not to completely eliminate carbohydrates, but you reduce or eliminate foods that are high in carbohydrates. So these are foods that have either some sugar, some kind of sweetener, or some food that is starchy, has a lot of starch in it. So these are mainly sugar and all kinds of sweeteners. Starchy foods like grains. Legumes also have a lot of starch. Vegetables like potatoes, sweet potatoes, taro root, they are quite starchy also. So you want to reduce all of these sources of carbohydrates in your food. So to answer your question, how much do you reduce them? That will vary from person to person. So probably if you are eating vegetarian diet and you start counting the amount of carbohydrates in your diet, you might find that you're consuming 200 grams in a day of carbohydrates. For some people it might be even more. It might even be 250 or 300. And that's a lot. No amount of medication will be able to compensate and correct for that high level of carbohydrates. So for some people whose insulin resistance is not too much, 100 grams of carbohydrates is something their body might tolerate. For some people, 100 grams will be too much. They may need to reduce to 50 grams per day or even less. So you have to try out for yourself how much you need to reduce the carbohydrates so that you have the kind of blood glucose control that you want. Okay, so the second recommendation is to include an adequate amount of protein in your diet. So that may vary a little from person to person. So you don't have to do too much of protein, but protein does satisfy your appetite, and you feel satiated for a longer time. So there's for a longer time you won't feel those pangs of hunger. So for that purpose, protein helps. It does not increase blood sugar too much or too fast. But also to include healthy fats in your diet. For many people, this is a hard one because they have been advised for a long time to follow a low-fat diet. And unfortunately, many people have compensated by adding the carbohydrate sources of foods in their diet, whether in the form of oatmeal, quinoa, whole wheat grain, fruit, things that are said to be healthy, and they are healthy for a non-diabetic person, but for a person with diabetes who has trouble managing blood glucose, these are very high in carbohydrates and they will increase blood sugars. Instead, as you're reducing your carbohydrate consumption, you can start adding healthy fats in your diet. So what are healthy fats? For example, there are some fruit like avocado, coconut, olives, which are very rich in fats, and these are healthy fats. Tree nuts like almonds, walnuts, pistachios, pecans, macadamia nuts are very rich in healthy fats. There are several seeds like flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, sunflower seeds, sesame seeds that also have healthy fats. Oils like olive oil, sesame oil, coconut oil are good choices. If you eat fish, then cold water fish like salmon contains healthy fats. Dairy fat like butter, cream, ghee are also good options. So you can start increasing these healthy fats in your diet as you cut down carbohydrates. When you consume fat, it does two things that helps with blood sugar. Number one, it does not increase your blood glucose. So the insulin secretion is not so high. That reduces inflammation in your body. Secondly, fat satiates you. You might have noticed even 1 tablespoon of ghee satiates you for a long time. And so you will find that you don't have that craving 1 or 2 hours after a meal that you have if your meal is very high in carbohydrates. So that will help to take care of sugar cravings. Because over time, what happens is that your body starts learning how to burn fat for fuel. Every organ in the body can use glucose as fuel, which is like a high octane fuel, or it can use fat as a fuel, which is a little harder to burn. It needs more training. But in even a couple of weeks, if there is less glucose available, your body will start burning more fat that you're consuming. And mind you, your body always has access to body fat. So once it gets trained to burn fat, it'll start burning body fat also. So it actually helps to burn body fat. Okay, so you bring another question, a related question about the number of meals. Is 3 meals enough? Should you make it smaller meals and 5 meals? So I want to be very clear about this. The Ayurveda recommendation is fewer meals. For some people, it may be 3 meals. For some people, it may be even 2 meals. There are many people who don't feel very hungry in the morning, and eating breakfast at that time is not a good idea. So for them, 2 meals is enough. 1 meal in the morning, 1 in the evening, and that's enough. For some people, maybe a breakfast is necessary, especially with our work schedules and so on. It is practical to eat breakfast and then lunch and dinner, but not more than that. Okay, so I'm going to skip the rest about foods and start talking about Ayurvedic herbs, because I know a lot of you want to know about that. Okay. So I won't spend much time talking about physical activity, except that it is important. And the more regular physical activity that you have, the better it is. It doesn't have to be very intense. It should be something that you're able to do. Regular walking is good. If you're able to go to the gym a few times a week, that's good too, because resistance training helps to improve insulin sensitivity. But there are many other kinds. You choose an activity that you enjoy doing so that you can do it regularly. That's the main idea. So we'll start talking about Ayurvedic herbs, and I will describe 10 herbs from Ayurveda that are very effective in managing blood sugars. Just a word of caution though, I don't suggest that you pick one of these and start using it on your own, because they all have different benefits, multiple good benefits, and depending on the stage of your condition, depending on how much insulin resistance you might have, some complications that you might have developed, your individual prakriti, one or other might be most suitable for you, and the dosage for you maybe has to be determined by a practitioner. So with I will answer those questions at the end. Okay. So let me start with Mamajjaka, which is in Gujarat. It's called Mamejava. It's a plant that grows in tropical parts of India, and it's very bitter in taste, and it has a heating effect on the body. So because of that, it's very effective in balancing kapha and pitta doshas. It helps to regulate your digestion, your appetite. It reduces body mass and reduces blood glucose. It's good for the liver also. So it has multiple benefits. So this is one of the herbs that I choose for many people. There is also Bijaka, which is a tree, also called Vijayasar. The heartwood of the tree is used as medicine by making a decoction. So you make a coarse powder of the heartwood and boil it into a decoction, either by itself or with other herbs. And with this combination of herbs, it is given as a decoction, and this is also very effective, good liver medicine also. Meshashringi. So I have Meshashringi here. This is also called Gymnema sylvester, is the scientific name. It's very well studied in Western medicine also, or in the West. And this is a vine that grows in tropical parts of India. You take the leaves and some other parts of the plant also, and you dry them up in the shade, and it can be made into the powder. An interesting property of this is that if you chew on the leaf or the powder of the leaf, then it temporarily numbs the taste sensation, especially for sweet taste. So this is often used as a way to curb sweet cravings. Another effect is that it reduces the carbohydrate absorption in the digestive tract. So even if your meal had more carbohydrates than you wanted, some of it won't be absorbed if you have taken Meshashringi, Gymnema. Another benefit of this is, to some extent, it helps to regenerate the beta cells. So it has been found that people who have been taking Meshashringi, after a while their need for insulin has dropped. So many benefits of Meshashringi. Fourth one is Daru Haridra. I have a sample of that also. Now this is a tree that grows in the Himalayas. Daru Haridra literally means tree, turmeric. Daru means tree, Haridra is the Sanskrit for turmeric. And it's called that because the heartwood is yellowish in color, as you can see. Perhaps you can see even from a distance. So this has many beneficial properties. It is either made into a decoction or dried and powdered. And when you take it, it improves the cholesterol numbers. It improves liver function. It helps with the flow of bile. And it reduces blood glucose. Turmeric has been studied a lot. Many scientific studies have been done, and it's one of the best antioxidants, antimicrobial, antitumoral, anti-inflammatory. It improves blood cholesterol and also improves blood sugar. So I use it liberally in my cooking. So you don't even have to take a supplement if you are using it in your food. So the question is about the active ingredient in turmeric, which is curcumin. That is true. Now in Ayurveda, we don't use the active ingredient only. We use herbs in their complete form. So the idea is that we know the effect of the complete herb. So we choose a sample that has the most potency, and there may be other ingredients that we don't know about today. You say 30, 40 years ago, we didn't know about so many flavonoids and active ingredients in foods. Doesn't mean they were not there, but we had the benefit of those all the same. So in Ayurveda, we use the complete herb because nature has packaged them in a way that it helps to balance our doshas in a certain way. Okay, let's talk about Guduchi, which is one of the best herbs in Ayurveda. It is a vine that grows in the tropical parts of India, and the stem becomes quite starchy and thick. It is extremely bitter in taste. So because of the starchiness combined with the bitterness, it balances all three doshas, Vata, Pitta and Kapha. So it's a good medicine for many conditions, including diabetes, because it reduces blood glucose. Guduchi is also a rasayana, which means that it helps to maintain all the body tissues in optimal condition. So it helps with the optimal functioning of all the body tissues. Jambu is a fruit, jamun in Hindi, which ripens after the mango season, and it is purple in color, sweet, sour, astringent in taste. Now the seed of jamun is of interest here because the seed powder, it helps to reduce blood glucose, and it also is a good liver medicine. Karavellaka is the Sanskrit for Karela or bitter gourd. Now, you know it's very bitter in taste, but very good medicine for, it helps to reduce kapha and pitta. Very good, very immediate effect on blood sugar. So if you're consuming even a small amount of Karela in your meal, it'll reduce your blood sugar. If you don't have if it's not in season, even if you take dry powder of Karela, that will help to reduce blood sugar. At the end of the meal, some people feel like eating sweet because their mouth is feeling a bit hot. Try putting some bitter powder in your mouth instead. So that doesn't sound very kind, but you will find that it will reduce your craving for sugars or craving for sweets, at the same time reducing blood sugar. So the most medicinal benefit of Karela is in the skin, which is the most bitter. So some people scrape the skin or they marinate it to remove the juices, then you're not getting all the benefit. So if you're brave enough, or if you can tolerate it, don't remove the skin, don't cook it too much, and if you can taste the bitterness, you're getting the most benefit out of it. Okay, two more. One is bilva, which is called bale in Hindi. It's a large fruit of the citrus family. The tree is quite large, like 20 feet tall. And this is beneficial in many ways. It is a very good digestive aid, especially for diarrhea. It's a very good liver medicine, but in this context, it's also helpful for reducing blood glucose. And finally, I'll mention one more, which is twak or cinnamon. Cinnamon has been shown to manage blood glucose. And I have a sample of cinnamon here. You're familiar with cinnamon, but I brought this because there are different types of cinnamon. And what you get in the market is cassia cinnamon. But if you're consuming a lot of cinnamon, then it's better to consume Ceylon cinnamon, Cinnamomum zeylanicum. And this is not easily available in the stores. It's a little more expensive, but you can go online and search for Ceylon cinnamon and you'll find it. I've given a lot of advice, and how do you know if any of these recommendations are going to work for you? You can find out for yourself by testing your own blood sugar. And the way to do it is, remember that there are some things that affect your blood sugar a lot, particularly foods, exercise, and medicines. So what is the effect on your body? Your doctor may be ordering A1C tests every 3 months or 6 months, so you know sort of how you're doing, but that doesn't tell you what was working and what was not working. So to find out what works for you, let's say you have a certain diet right now, you have a certain breakfast. Maybe you eat breakfast at 8 o'clock. So just before you start eating breakfast, take a reading. And then 2 hours after, you take another reading and record it. For the same meal, the same breakfast, do it for 3 days. So you have 3 sets of readings for the same meal. Then you make some of the changes that I've recommended. Okay. Cut down your carbohydrates significantly. Okay. Again, do the same test on your breakfast. Maybe you have removed oatmeal from your breakfast and replaced it with some healthy fat. Just before the breakfast, take a reading. 2 hours later, take another reading. Do that for 3 days. You will see for yourself what kind of change it is making to your blood glucose. Thank you so much for your interest. I appreciate all these questions and your participation. Good night.